U.S. Diet Guidelines sidestep scientific advice to cut sugar and alcohol. Two government departments responsible for updating the national diet standards have concluded their work every 5 years and recommend an extensive solution to balanced nutritional trends. The new 2020 to 2025 dietary recommendations for Americans, revealed by Agriculture, Health and Human Services officials on Tuesday at a pre-recorded gathering, have included an instructive sentence to count every morsel. The new policy is similar to the previous doctrines of the Obama administration announced in the latter days but also does not include the main commission. Refined sugar can constitute less than 10% of the daily calories of a person starting at the age of 2 and be prevented before that age, according to recommendations. An additional reduction in the intake of alcohol by both men and women on days when alcohol is eaten has been suggested in the scientific report published earlier this year by the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which reviews previous science and proposes changes to USDA and HHS. But an official from the USDA Food and Nutrition Service Center, Food and Promotion, said that there was not enough evidence to justify these reductions at the announcement gathering. The diet standards impact American eating patterns, influence food stamping programs, and school lunch menus, and implicitly influence the formulation of food suppliers. Yet recent recommendations are not about the latest pandemic, nor do they discuss the new scientific consensus that food shortages and chronic disorders must be minimized by dietary habits. The guideline not on biodiversity or pollution of greenhouse gases, which are both closely related to industrial food production, does not involve climate change. A study released last fall by a science expert panel has suggested that the recommendations allow Americans to make significant cuts to 6 of daily calories from currently prescribed 10 in their intake of added sugar in beverages and foods. Added sugar, particularly in the form of sweetened drinks, is evidenced, according to the scientific panel, as a contributor to obesity and gain in weight associated with higher rates of chronic disorders such as heart disease and type 2 diabetes. More than 2/3 of American adults are overweight or obese. The risk of contracting extreme COVID-19 disease is raised by obesity, diabetes, and other associated conditions as well. The science expert panel has requested that the daily alcohol intake of both women and men should be reduced to 1 drink a day, citing increasing evidence that eating larger doses of alcohol has a greater chance of death than consuming smaller quantities. The current recommendations consider queer calories that can add additional pounds and admit that there are data to show that alcohol may be linked with certain cancers and certain types of coronary disorders, a withdrawal from the once prevalent idea that heavy consumption may be safe for health. But the Energy Department and Vocational Rehab Department leaders have opposed specific sugar and alcohol intake quotas. A study from the Science Consultative Committee last summer recommended that the directives allow Americans to make dramatic cuts to 6%, of the recommended 10%, in their intake of sugar added to beverages and foods. The panel noted that the high prevalence of obesity and overweight in the U.S. are correlated with severe chronic health problems such as cardiac and type 2 diabetes, as well as raising the likelihood that serious COVID-19 conditions will arise. The panel also requested that regular alcohol consumption be limited to 1 drink a day for men, noting specifically that a greater alcoholic intake is on average correlated with an elevated risk of death correlated with a low drink intake. But this recommendation continues to be for women 1 drink a day and men, 2. Sugar and alcohol limits were refused by offices in the Ministry of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. The guideline states that the preponderance of evidence supports limiting intakes of added sugars and alcoholic beverages to promote health and prevent disease. However, the evidence reviewed since the 2015 to 2020 edition does not substantiate quantitative changes at this time. Sweetened foods, including sodas, as well as sweetened cafes and teas, sweets, candy, and candies, as well as breakfast cereals and bars, are the primary sources of added sugar in the American diet. The majority of Americans also surpass the 10 mark. On average, sugars make up 13 of daily calories. critics were upset that the Science Advisory Committee's findings had been rejected by the federal agencies. Marion Nestle, professor of diet and food sciences at NYU and author of several books on the government's food guidelines, told her that, "I'm shocked by this whole thing." Earlier this year, the makeup of the nutritional consultative committees created concern when many consultants had links with the beef and dairy industries. However, scientists have gone better than previous commissions with their proposals to eliminate alcohol and sugar, Nestle said. Those were big changes, and they got all the attention when the report came out last summer for very good reasons, and they were ignored in the final report, says Nestle. The article was portrayed as a fact-based one, several times used and made a huge argument about the term science, she said. However, she skipped the independent commission they named, which I felt was fantastic. Moreover, the latest directives fall following the federal guidelines that were recently released, which urges Americans to consume healthiest foods such as tomatoes, fruits, vegetables, whole grain products, nuts, fish, low-fat and non-fat milk, and maize meat and poultry. The recommendations advise the country to eat less sugar, fat, salt, and alcohol and restrict its intake of calories. Americans derive 13 of their calories from added sugars on average. To meet the guidelines, the people would have had to slash their intake by over a fourth. Licensed dietitian Connie Diekman accepted that the recommendations for added sugars had not been modified enough at this time. That fact is likely correct, but I would remind people that the daily guidelines for Americans states that we need to meet nutrient needs first and then we can add some added sugars, said Diekman, a former president of the Diet Academy. Owing to the lower calorie requirement for many Americans, there is no room for added sugar due to lower exercise levels. If the present average intake of added sugars is 13, then working towards 10 would improve nutrient satisfaction and caloric management for people. About 24 of the supplemental American diets with sugar-sweetened drinks making up 19 of dessert and sandwich, 11 of coffee and tea, 9 of sweets and sugar, 7 breakfast cereals and bars, 7 sandwiches and 7 fatter milk and more yogurt, 4 of which complied with the 2020 to 2025 nutritional advice directives. The latest advice stresses a diet packed with nutrient-dense food, offering explanations of how the calorie counts of otherwise balanced meals are raised with the inclusion of sugars and fats. For e.g., a 110-calorie skim milk espresso is converted into a 290-calorie full-fat mocha by adding 79 milk fat calories and 101 chocolate syrup calories, according to the guideline. A healthy dietary pattern doesn't have much room for extra added sugars, saturated fat, or sodium, or for alcoholic beverages, read the recommendations 2020 to 2025. For saturated fat and sodium, the guidelines uphold the same recommendations, fewer than 10 of calories a day for saturated fat and under 2,300 milligrams of sodium. Dr. Mitchell Elkind, chairman of the American Heart Association, said he was disappointed that USDA and HHS did not accept all of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee's science-based recommendations in the final guidelines for 2020, including the recommendation to lower added sugars consumption to less than 6% of calories. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, like, comment if you haven't already. Meet you with the new video.